Cowboy rented a house for one night, but found out an Apache woman had been hiding there for weeks. Tom Walker rode slowly along the dusty trail, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of earth with each step. The sun was dipping below the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. He had been traveling for days, moving from one town to another, often alone, often with only his thoughts and his horse for company. There was a calmness in the solitude, but there was also a kind of loneliness that crept in quietly, especially as the shadows grew longer and the world seemed to shrink into darkness. Tom had always liked traveling, liked the feeling of the open plain stretching endlessly before him. But tonight, as the air turned cooler and the evening settled in, he felt a deep longing for a place to rest, a place to feel safe even if only for a few hours. As he turned a corner along the trail, he saw the house. It was small and simple, built near the edge of a canyon where the land dropped sharply into a dry, rocky valley. The wooden structure had a weathered look, the paint long gone, leaving the grayish wood exposed to the sun and wind. The roof was uneven with a few shingles missing, and the front porch sagged slightly as if it had carried too many years. Despite its rough appearance, the house seemed welcoming in a quiet, lonely way. Tom could see that it had been abandoned for some time, yet there was a sense that someone had once cared for it. Perhaps the previous owners had left in a hurry, or perhaps they had moved on in search of a better life. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter to Tom. He needed shelter, and this place would do. He guided his horse onto the porch, tying it to a post with a strong rope. The horse snorted and shook its mane, kicking at the dust. Tom patted its neck gently, whispering a few calming words. "Easy there, old friend. Just for one night, then we move on." The horse nickered softly, as if understanding, and settled down to nibble at some dry grass near the edge of the porch. Tom took a deep breath and looked around. The canyon beyond the house was quiet, almost eerily so. The wind rustled through the sparse trees, creating faint, whispering sounds. The silence was both comforting and unsettling. He pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading light from the windows. Dust hung in the air and the floorboards groaned slightly under his weight. Tom noticed small signs that the house had been used not too long ago, a half-filled cup on the table, footprints in the dust that didn't quite match his own, and a small pile of newspapers in the corner. At first, he thought little of it. Perhaps some travelers had stayed here recently, he reasoned, or maybe it was left behind by a previous renter. Tom had learned long ago not to overthink things. Out on the plains, one had to accept the unexpected as part of life. He dropped his bag on a chair and began unpacking the few belongings he carried. A change of clothes, a small blanket, and some dried meat he had brought along. Cooking over a small stove, he prepared a modest meal. The aroma of the food filled the room and seemed to breathe life into the old house. As he ate, he glanced around, noticing the cracks in the walls, the cobwebs in the corners, and the faded curtains that fluttered slightly in the breeze. The house had a story, one he couldn't yet understand, but it gave him a strange sense of connection, as if he had stepped into someone else's life for a moment, sharing in its quiet history. After the meal, he washed his hands in a small basin of water and settled into a chair by the window. Outside, the canyon stretched endlessly, the shadows of the rocks growing longer with the fading light. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird returning to its nest, the low howl of a coyote in the distance. Tom felt a sense of peace, a rare kind that came only when the world slowed down, when the mind could rest and wander freely. Yet beneath that calm, a small flicker of unease lingered. The house was too quiet, too still. And those small signs, the footprints, the cup, the newspapers, hinted that he was not entirely alone, even if no one was in plain sight. He stood and walked slowly through the rooms, examining the furniture, the shelves, and the faded pictures on the walls. One photo caught his eye, a young family, smiling in the sunlight, standing in front of the very house he now occupied. There was a father, a mother, and a little girl with curly hair. Their eyes were bright, their expressions happy, yet there was a hint of sadness in the way they held each other. Tom wondered what had happened to them, where they were now, and why the house had been left behind. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing for the life they had once known, a life so different from his own solitary existence on the open plains. As night fell, he lit a lantern, the soft glow casting long shadows across the walls. The room took on a warm, golden hue, but with the shadows came a sense of mystery. He could hear the wind through the cracks in the windows, the distant call of an owl, and the faint creak of the house settling in the cool night air. And then, almost imperceptibly, he heard it, the soft shuffle of movement from the back room. At first he froze, thinking it might be his imagination. But the sound came again, deliberate and quiet. Tom's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his revolver. He was no stranger to danger, no stranger to the unknown, and yet there was something about this noise that made his heart quicken. He moved quietly toward the sound, listening carefully. The shuffling stopped, and for a moment there was complete silence. Tom's eyes adjusted to the dim light, scanning the corners of the room, the shadows under the furniture and the doorway leading to the back. His mind raced through possibilities, a stray animal, a traveler seeking shelter, or perhaps someone less fortunate, hiding for reasons he could not yet understand. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Out here in the vast emptiness of the frontier, one could never be too careful. And yet he felt a strange pull, a curiosity mixed with concern, urging him to discover the source of the noise. With careful steps, Tom approached the back room. The floorboards creaked softly under his weight. He paused at the doorway, peering inside. The room was small, filled with the faint smell of dust and something else, something earthy, almost like the scent of the nearby canyon. And then he saw it, a blanket, partially covering a corner of the room, moving slightly as if something underneath it breathed quietly. Tom's pulse quickened, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Whoever or whatever was there might be frightened, as he often had been in moments of vulnerability. He called out softly, "Hello, is someone there?" He had learned over the years that fear often came from misunderstanding, and that patience could reveal the truth in ways force never could. Taking another slow breath, he reached out and gently moved the blanket aside, revealing a sight that made him stop in his tracks. There, huddled in the corner, was a young Apache woman. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear, surprise, and exhaustion. Her clothes were worn and dusty, her hair tangled from days of hiding. She did not speak, did not move at first, but the intensity of her gaze told Tom everything he needed to know. She had been alone for a long time, surviving in the shadows, and she was unsure if she could trust him. Tom lowered his lantern further, offering a soft, reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." The woman's eyes flickered, uncertainty still visible, but she did not flee. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Tom realized that the night, the house, and his journey had brought him to this unexpected encounter, a meeting that would change the course of both their lives. The silence in the small house seemed to stretch endlessly. Tom Walker stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the young Apache woman, her dark eyes wide and alert. He could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched as if protecting herself from an unseen threat. He lowered his lantern slowly so it would not blind her or make her feel cornered. The light flickered on the wooden walls, casting shadows that danced like ghostly figures. Tom spoke again softly. "I said I won't hurt you. You're safe here." Tom realized that for weeks, maybe longer, this woman had been hiding in this very house, surviving on whatever scraps she could find, moving silently to avoid detection. The thought made his stomach tight. She had endured so much alone, and now here he was, a stranger, offering her a chance for safety. He stepped forward a little, trying not to appear threatening. "Do you need water?" "Food?" His voice was calm, steady, though he could feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins. The woman didn't respond at first, only watching him closely. Her eyes were wary, but there was also a glimmer of hope. Slowly, she nodded toward the small table where he had left his meal. Tom understood the silent gesture and went to get some bread and dried meat, placing it carefully in front of her. He didn't force her to eat, only offered it, letting her choose whether to trust him. She picked up a piece of bread and tore it into small bites, her hands trembling slightly. Tom watched in silence, his own mind racing with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up here alone? And most importantly, why had no one found her before now? The house felt larger with her presence, filled with an unspoken tension that hovered like a thin veil over everything. Outside, the wind continued to whistle through the cracks, carrying faint sounds of the night, an owl hooting, the distant howl of a coyote, and the rustle of leaves. The world outside the house seemed vast and dangerous, yet inside there was a fragile sense of connection forming. After a few minutes, the woman spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but clear enough for Tom to understand. "Name Morning Star," she said. Her accent was soft, accented by the rhythm of her native tongue. Tom nodded, giving her a small smile. "I'm Tom," he replied. "You're safe here tonight, Morning Star. That's all that matters for now." The words felt simple, but there was weight in them. He meant every word. Out here, alone on the plains, safety was rare and precious. And tonight he intended to give her that gift, even if only for a few hours. Morning Star's gaze shifted around the room, taking in the old furniture, the shadows, and the faint glow of the lantern. She seemed cautious but also curious. Tom noticed the careful way she moved, testing the floorboards, checking corners, and peeking under the table. Her behavior told him she had spent a lot of time hiding, learning to survive in quiet spaces without being seen. She had endured days, maybe weeks, living in fear of being discovered. Tom felt a deep sense of respect for her courage, even as he wondered what had forced her into such a life. He decided to speak gently, trying to ease the tension. "You've been hiding here a long time, haven't you?" he asked, though he already guessed the answer. Morning Star nodded slightly, her eyes lowering to the floor. Tom could tell it was hard for her to speak about her experiences. Fear and uncertainty had become constant companions, and trust did not come easily. He didn't push. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, giving her the space to feel safe. Sometimes, he knew, silence spoke louder than words. Outside, the night grew darker, and the wind carried with it the cool scent of the canyon and the distant pine trees. Tom could hear the faint sounds of the wild, the shifting of rocks, the flutter of a bat's wings, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Each sound reminded him of the vastness and unpredictability of the frontier. Life out here was raw, unforgiving, and full of surprises, but it was also beautiful in a quiet, untamed way. Tom had spent much of his life traveling these lands, learning to read the signs of nature, to understand the subtle language of survival. Tonight, those lessons would serve him well. Morning Star finally spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "Scouts looking for me," she said, her hands clutching the small blanket she had wrapped around herself. Tom listened carefully, piecing together the fragments of her story. She had been fleeing danger, moving silently through the wilderness, seeking refuge wherever she could find it. The house, abandoned and forgotten, had become her sanctuary. For weeks, she had survived in silence, careful not to leave traces that could reveal her location. The thought of her enduring such fear alone sent a shiver down Tom's spine. He realized that the encounter was not just chance. It was fate placing him here at this moment, giving him a chance to help someone in need. Tom decided to act with patience and empathy. He moved closer, keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now, Morning Star," he said softly. "No one is going to hurt you here tonight." Her eyes flickered toward him, searching, trying to gauge whether his words were true. Slowly, she relaxed just a little, lowering her hands. Tom knew trust would take time, but this small moment of relief was a start. He offered her a cup of water, which she took cautiously, sipping it slowly as if testing the safety of each drop. The house, once silent and empty, now seemed alive with a quiet energy. The presence of another human being, vulnerable yet resilient, created a tension that was both fragile and powerful. Tom could sense the strength it had taken for Morning Star to survive alone, the intelligence and courage required to navigate a world that had been dangerous to her. And yet, beneath that strength, there was vulnerability, an innocence shaped by fear and circumstance. Tom felt a mix of admiration and protectiveness, knowing that the night ahead would require both patience and vigilance. Hours passed and the wind outside grew colder. Tom made a small fire in the old stove, its warmth spreading slowly through the room. The flames flickered, casting moving shadows that danced across the walls. Morning Star watched the fire, her face illuminated by its soft glow. She did not speak much, only occasionally offering a nod or a quiet comment. Tom respected her silence, understanding that after weeks of hiding and fear, words were not always necessary. Sometimes, presence alone, the act of being there for someone, was enough to convey safety and comfort. As the night deepened, Tom walked around the house, checking the doors and windows. Everything was quiet outside, yet he remained alert. The frontier was unpredictable, and even a small sound could signal danger. His experience as a cowboy had taught him to be observant, to notice details others might miss. Footprints in the dust, a snapped branch outside, or the faint sound of movement could all tell a story if one knew how to read them. Tom's mind worked quickly, planning for any situation while keeping Morning Star's safety as his priority. Eventually, he returned to the table, sitting across from her. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "we'll figure out a way for you to be safe, somewhere no one will find you." Morning Star looked at him, her eyes filled with cautious hope. She nodded, understanding that for now, the promise of tomorrow was all she could rely on. Tom knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but he also understood that every long journey began with a single, careful step. Tonight, they would rest. Tonight, they would find a brief moment of peace in the old house, away from the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. The night stretched on, filled with quiet sounds, the crackle of the fire, the soft rustle of the blanket as Morning Star adjusted her position, and the occasional creak of the house settling. Tom kept watch, his senses alert, yet he allowed himself to feel a rare sense of calm. He knew that whatever challenges awaited them tomorrow, tonight they had survived together. The connection forged in the quiet hours of the night, between a weary cowboy and a frightened young woman, would guide them through the trials ahead. In the flickering light of the lantern and fire, Tom realized that sometimes, life's most unexpected encounters brought the greatest lessons. Courage, trust, and compassion were not just ideals. They were choices made in moments like this, when the world was uncertain and the night stretched long and silent. And for the first time in many days, Tom felt a sense of purpose beyond himself. He was not just a traveler on the plains tonight. He was a protector, a witness, and perhaps, in some small way, a companion to someone who had endured more than most could imagine. Morning Star remained seated quietly, her small frame hunched over the food Tom had offered. Her dark eyes were wide, alert, scanning the room as if expecting danger at any moment. Tom could see the fatigue etched into her features, deep lines of exhaustion that came not just from travel, but from constant fear. He understood that the young woman had been running for weeks, moving silently across rugged terrain, hiding whenever she felt the threat of discovery. Her presence in the small house was not by chance. It was a place of temporary refuge, a fragile sanctuary in a world that had been relentless and harsh. After a few minutes of silence, Tom decided it was time to approach carefully, not just with caution but with curiosity tempered by empathy. "Morning Star," he said softly, "if you want, you can tell me why you've been hiding here." His voice was calm, patient, without pressure or demand. The Apache woman's eyes flickered toward him, hesitation evident in the way she shifted slightly. She took a slow, deep breath and began speaking in a quiet, measured voice, her English simple but understandable. "Scouts searching for me," she said. "I leave village before they find me." Tom's heart tightened as he imagined the terror she had endured, moving silently through forests and canyons, never resting fully, always aware of eyes that could appear at any moment. The young woman's courage was remarkable, but so was the cost it had extracted from her spirit. Tom decided to show kindness first, before asking any more questions that might frighten her. He poured a small cup of water and handed it to her. She took it carefully, sipping slowly as if testing the safety of each drop. "You've been alone for a long time," he said softly. "You must be very tired." Morning Star nodded slightly, her lips pressed tightly together. She had learned long ago to endure to survive, but the comfort of a warm place, food, and a friendly presence was something she had rarely experienced. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, letting the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Tom wanted to understand more, but he knew patience was key. He spoke gently about small, safe topics first. "I travel the plains most of the time," he said. "I've seen many people come and go, but I've never met anyone as quiet and careful as you." Morning Star's eyes met his for a brief moment, curiosity flickering in the darkness. She understood in some way that he respected her strength and her survival. Slowly, the initial fear began to loosen its grip, though she remained cautious. The room, once tense and filled with uncertainty, felt warmer, less like a hiding place and more like a shared space, however temporary. Hours passed quietly as the two sat together. Tom told stories of his travels across the plains, the towns he had visited, the storms he had ridden out, and the lonely nights spent under open skies. Morning Star listened, occasionally nodding or asking a few simple questions. She shared small fragments of her life, enough to convey her story without revealing too much too soon. She spoke of her village, of the people she loved, and of the sudden need to flee when danger arrived. Each word painted a picture of a young woman forced to grow up quickly, to navigate a world where trust was scarce and safety was fleeting. Tom was struck by her intelligence and resilience. Despite her youth, she had learned to survive under extreme conditions, to read the land, and to anticipate danger before it came. Her eyes, though tired, held a sharp awareness, a quiet strength that spoke of battles fought both in the wilderness and within herself. He realized that she had been living in constant alertness, moving silently to avoid detection, and yet she had not lost her humanity. There was a gentleness in the way she observed the world, a curiosity that had survived fear, and a capacity for trust that had not been extinguished. As the night deepened, Tom decided it was time to make a plan for safety. He knew they could not stay in the house indefinitely. It was isolated, but it could still be discovered. He spoke carefully, explaining that while tonight was for rest, tomorrow they would need to consider a path forward. Morning Star listened attentively, nodding as he outlined his ideas. "We will need to move quietly," he said. "We cannot take the main trails. We must follow the hidden paths, the ones only travelers like me know." Her eyes widened slightly at the thought of leaving the safety of the small house, but she understood that staying was not an option. The wilderness was dangerous, but so was inaction. Tom also emphasized the importance of caution and observation. "Every sound matters," he said. "Every footprint, every shadow. We must read the land, understand it, and let it guide us. That is how we will stay safe." Morning Star nodded, absorbing each word. She had learned similar lessons in her own way, how to move silently, how to hide, and how to survive in harsh conditions. Now, with Tom as her guide, she had a chance to use her knowledge alongside his, combining experience and instinct to navigate a treacherous world. As dawn approached, the first hints of light filtered through the small windows, casting a soft glow on the wooden floor. The night had been long, filled with quiet conversation, careful observation, and moments of reflection. Tom and Morning Star had shared stories, fears, and small gestures of trust. In the quiet hours, an unspoken bond had formed, a connection born not of words alone, but of shared humanity and mutual respect. Tom realized that the encounter had changed him, too. He had come to the house expecting solitude and routine, but instead, he found someone in need, someone whose courage and resilience demanded admiration. Tom decided to prepare for the day ahead. He quietly arranged his belongings, checking the condition of his horse and making sure they were ready for travel. Morning Star observed his actions, asking a few cautious questions about the journey. Tom answered patiently, explaining the routes, the dangers, and the precautions they would take. The Apache woman listened intently, her trust growing with each careful word. The bond between them strengthened, built on understanding, empathy, and the unspoken knowledge that they would need to rely on each other in the challenges to come. Before leaving, Tom offered Morning Star a small piece of advice. "Rest as much as you can," he said. "Tomorrow the journey begins. We will need your strength, your awareness, and your courage. But tonight you are safe, and that is enough." She nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face for the first time in what seemed like weeks. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Trust was fragile, yet it had begun to take root in the quiet of the old house, amidst the shadows and the flickering lantern light. The first light of morning touched the edges of the canyon, illuminating the rugged beauty of the landscape. The wind carried the scents of pine, earth, and distant wildflowers, filling the air with a sense of freshness and possibility. Tom and Morning Star sat quietly for a moment, watching the sun rise, absorbing the peace before the challenges of the day began. The night had revealed much courage, resilience, and the beginnings of trust, but the real test was yet to come. The frontier was unpredictable, and their journey to safety would require careful planning, quick thinking, and unwavering determination. Morning Star's story had begun to unfold, her hardships and her courage becoming clear to Tom. He knew that helping her would not be simple, but he also understood that some responsibilities were unavoidable. Life had placed them together in this isolated house, and now it was his choice to protect, guide, and support her. In the quiet dawn, he felt a sense of purpose, a determination that went beyond himself. He would ensure that Morning Star reached safety, even if it meant facing danger, uncertainty, and the unknown. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light over the canyon and the weathered house, Tom Walker made a silent promise. He would not let fear dictate their fate. He would navigate the wilderness, read its signs, and use every skill he had learned over years of travel to keep Morning Star safe. The night had been long, filled with quiet revelations, careful trust, and the beginnings of friendship. Now, with the first light of morning, the next chapter of their journey was about to begin, a journey that would test their courage, their trust, and the strength of the bond that had formed in the shadows of an old, lonely house. The first light of dawn spread slowly over the canyon, turning the rugged landscape into shades of gold and pink. Tom Walker rose quietly from the small chair where he had spent the night, careful not to wake Morning Star. The young Apache woman was already awake, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, staring out the small window. Her eyes reflected a mixture of fear, determination, and exhaustion. The long night of conversation and tentative trust had left both of them aware that the day ahead would not be easy. The wilderness was vast, unpredictable, and filled with unseen dangers. Yet, despite the uncertainty, a fragile sense of hope lingered between them. Tom moved toward the small kitchen area, lighting the stove and preparing a modest breakfast. He had a few pieces of bread, some dried meat, and water, enough to give them energy for the journey ahead. Morning Star watched him silently, her hands fidgeting with the blanket around her shoulders. Tom noticed the way she observed him, her sharp eyes taking in his movements, learning and preparing herself for the challenges to come. He smiled gently. "Eat something," he said softly. "We'll need our strength today." She nodded, reaching slowly for a piece of bread. The simple act of sharing a meal together was another small step in building trust, a gesture that carried more meaning than words. Once they had eaten, Tom moved to check his horse, tied securely on the porch. The animal nickered softly, sensing the presence of two humans preparing to leave. Tom patted its neck and whispered calming words. Morning Star stepped outside for the first time since sunrise, her eyes scanning the rugged terrain. The canyon stretched endlessly before them, the earth dry and rocky, dotted with sparse trees and shrubs. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scents of the wilderness, pine, earth, and the faint aroma of wildflowers hidden among the rocks. The world was beautiful, yet dangerous, and both of them understood that careful steps would be necessary to stay safe. Tom led the way, guiding Morning Star along a narrow path that wound around the edge of the canyon. He had chosen this route for its seclusion, avoiding the main trails where travelers, scouts, or hostile forces might appear. Morning Star followed closely, her steps cautious but sure. She had spent weeks moving silently through forests and canyons, and though the terrain was unfamiliar to her in this particular area, her instincts were sharp. Together they moved like shadows, careful to avoid making unnecessary noise. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light on the rocks and trees, illuminating the path ahead while also creating long shadows that could conceal danger. As they walked, Tom spoke quietly, offering guidance and encouragement. "Stay close," he said. "Move slowly. Listen to the wind. It can tell you things, footsteps, distant voices, even animals that may be nearby." Morning Star nodded, absorbing every word. Her eyes darted to the ground, noting footprints, broken twigs, and disturbed dirt, signs of movement that others might have missed. Tom smiled to himself, recognizing her skill. She was a survivor, just as he had suspected, and her knowledge of silence, observation, and careful movement would be invaluable in the hours to come. The canyon gradually opened into a wider valley, the terrain still rugged but easier to navigate. Tom paused at the edge of a small ridge, scanning the surrounding area. He saw no immediate threats, yet he remained alert. Danger could appear at any moment: wild animals, hostile men, or even accidental hazards hidden in the rough landscape. He motioned for Morning Star to stop and crouch beside him. Together, they observed the valley below. Birds flew overhead, their cries echoing across the rocks, and a distant stream glimmered in the morning sun. The beauty of the land was striking, but it could also be deceptive. Tom knew that appearances could hide dangers, and he taught her to read the signs: broken branches, displaced rocks, or unusual animal tracks, all clues that something or someone might be near. Morning Star listened carefully, her head tilted slightly as she absorbed every lesson. She had learned survival through experience, but Tom's knowledge of the local terrain added another layer of understanding. Together, they formed a team, each complementing the other's strengths. Tom guided her through careful steps, demonstrating how to move quietly over rocks, how to observe from high ground, and how to use natural cover to avoid detection. Morning Star followed his instructions with precision, impressed by his skill but also confident in her own abilities. The partnership that had begun in a small, dusty house was now becoming a bond forged in necessity, trust, and mutual respect. Hours passed as they navigated the valley, moving slowly but steadily. The sun climbed higher, warming the dry earth beneath their feet. They paused occasionally to rest, drinking water and sharing small bites of food. Each pause was a moment of quiet reflection, a time to gather strength for the journey ahead. Tom observed Morning Star closely, noting her resilience, determination, and the subtle ways she had adapted to life on the run. She had endured weeks of fear and isolation, and yet she moved with grace and awareness, her senses attuned to every sound and movement. As they continued, the path became narrower, winding through rocky outcrops and patches of dense brush. Tom led the way, signaling Morning Star to follow and teaching her how to move silently. The sun was high now, and the heat of the day made the journey physically demanding. Sweat ran down their faces, and muscles ached from constant vigilance. Yet neither faltered. The wilderness demanded endurance, patience, and focus, and both of them had learned to rely on these qualities. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a small forested area, the trees providing welcome shade and cover. Tom motioned for Morning Star to stay low and move quietly as they entered the woods. The forest was dense, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting shifting patterns on the ground. Tom led her along a narrow trail, careful to avoid broken branches or disturbed soil that could reveal their presence. Morning Star followed, her movements precise, her eyes scanning for any signs of danger. She felt a mixture of relief and anxiety, relief at the cover and shade, but anxiety knowing that the forest could also conceal unseen threats. As evening approached, they found a small clearing beside a stream, a perfect spot to rest before nightfall. Tom set down his bag and motioned for Morning Star to do the same. He filled their canteens with fresh water from the stream and offered her a small portion of food. She accepted it quietly, still cautious but more relaxed than earlier in the day. The sound of running water, the rustle of leaves, and the chirping of birds created a soothing backdrop, a rare moment of calm in the midst of a long, challenging journey. Tom took the opportunity to talk about the path ahead. "We will move carefully at first light," he said. "There is a safer settlement a few days' journey from here. You will have allies there who can help you." Morning Star listened attentively, her expression serious but determined. She understood the risks and knew that they could not afford mistakes. Tom could see the trust growing in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that she would rely on him, just as he would rely on her instincts and strength. As night fell, they built a small, controlled fire to keep warm, careful to hide it from any potential observers. The flames crackled softly, casting a warm glow on their faces. They sat close together, sharing the limited food they had and reflecting on the day's journey. Tom spoke quietly about his experiences traveling the plains, and Morning Star shared fragments of her life before the danger forced her to flee. Each story, each word, strengthened the bond between them. They were no longer just a cowboy and a frightened young woman. They were companions, united by necessity, courage, and growing trust. The night was long, but it was filled with quiet reassurance. Tom kept watch, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement, while Morning Star rested beside him, her head leaning slightly toward his shoulder. They had survived the day, navigating the challenges of the canyon, the valley, and the forest, but they knew the journey was far from over. Danger could appear at any moment, yet they felt a sense of accomplishment and growing confidence. Together, they had taken another step toward safety, each relying on the other's skill, courage, and resilience. In the quiet of the forest clearing, under the stars and the soft glow of the fire, Tom realized that the journey was teaching him as much as it was teaching Morning Star. Courage was not just about facing danger. It was about patience, observation, and trust. Survival depended not only on skill and strength, but also on the ability to connect with others, to share knowledge, and to protect one another. And in that moment, he felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that he was not just guiding her through the wilderness, but helping her reclaim a sense of hope, safety, and human connection. The morning sun rose gently over the forest, casting soft light through the trees and illuminating the small clearing where Tom and Morning Star had spent the night. The air was crisp and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and the gentle sound of the stream nearby. Both of them knew that today would be crucial. The safer settlement was still several days away, and the journey would test their endurance, their courage, and the bond they had built over the past 2 days. But the quiet confidence that had grown between them gave them strength. They had survived together so far, and they knew they could face whatever lay ahead. Tom stirred first, moving quietly so as not to disturb Morning Star. She had been sleeping fitfully, her body tense from the constant stress of travel and fear. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, waking her with a soft voice. "It's time to go," he said. Morning Star opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the sunlight. She nodded, sitting up and stretching her stiff limbs. The forest seemed alive with activity, The birds chirped, a squirrel darted along a branch, and the wind whispered through the leaves. For a brief moment, the world seemed peaceful, almost normal, a stark contrast to the danger they had endured for so long. They packed their few belongings with care, checking their water and food supplies. Tom led the way, moving silently through the forest, while Morning Star followed, learning from his careful steps. She had already absorbed much from him: the ways to notice danger, the ways to move quietly, the ways to trust her instincts while still listening to another's guidance. Together, they were a unit, relying on each other for survival, understanding, and support. The bond that had begun in a small, dusty house had grown stronger with every step, every shared glance, and every quiet word of encouragement. The path ahead led them through dense underbrush and over rocky terrain. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and casting moving shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Tom paused occasionally, scanning the area carefully, his senses alert for any signs of danger. Morning Star mirrored his vigilance, crouching low behind rocks, listening intently to the sounds of the forest, and learning to read the subtle signs that indicated whether someone or something might be near. Their progress was slow, deliberate, and cautious, but it was necessary. The wilderness was unpredictable, and rushing could lead to disaster. As the day progressed, they encountered challenges that tested their skills and patience. A fallen tree blocked their path, forcing them to find a narrow passage around it. A shallow stream had swollen from recent rain, making it difficult to cross without making noise. Each obstacle required problem-solving, communication, and careful movement. Tom guided Morning Star through these challenges, showing her how to find stable footing, how to use natural cover, and how to remain calm under pressure. Morning Star's confidence grew with every successful maneuver, her trust in Tom deepening as she realized he had her safety at heart. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a wide canyon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Tom paused, scanning the area for any signs of danger. "We'll need to move carefully," he said. "The settlement is just beyond that ridge, but the open ground could be risky." Morning Star nodded, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the path. Together, they planned their approach, moving from one patch of cover to the next, pausing whenever a sound or movement suggested caution. Every step was measured, every action deliberate, and the tension in the air was palpable. The final stretch of the journey proved to be the most challenging. As they approached the settlement, they noticed signs of human activity: footprints, broken branches, and faint smoke rising in the distance. Tom signaled for Morning Star to stay low and quiet. They crept forward, keeping to the shadows and moving with precision. Morning Star's heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had survived weeks of hiding and running, but now she was so close to safety, and yet the risk of being discovered was real. She focused on Tom's guidance, trusting his experience and instinct as they navigated the last stretch. Finally, they reached the edge of the settlement, a small village nestled among trees and gentle hills. The sounds of daily life, children playing, people talking, and animals moving, welcomed them like a sign of normalcy. Tom led Morning Star to a quiet spot at the edge, away from prying eyes, and whispered, "We've made it. You're safe now." Morning Star's eyes filled with relief, tears threatening to fall. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax, to feel the safety and warmth of human presence. She had survived the wilderness, the fear, and the unknown, and now she had reached a place where she could start anew. Tom introduced Morning Star to a few trusted villagers, explaining her situation in careful, simple words. The villagers received her with kindness, offering food, water, and shelter. Morning Star was overwhelmed by the generosity, but she knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She no longer needed to hide in fear. She could rest, recover, and plan for the future. Tom watched from a distance, a sense of quiet satisfaction filling him. The journey had been difficult, but it had been worth it. He had helped someone in need, guided her to safety, and formed a bond that neither time nor distance could break. As the evening approached, Tom and Morning Star sat quietly by a small fire, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken together. "I never thought I would make it this far," Morning Star said softly. Her voice was filled with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and relief. Tom smiled gently. "You were brave the whole way," he replied. "I just helped guide you. You survived because of your strength, your awareness, and your courage." She nodded, understanding that survival was a combination of skill, trust, and determination. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars, and the world seemed vast and full of possibilities. Morning Star shared more of her story, recounting memories of her family, her village, and the people she loved. Tom listened intently, realizing how much resilience she had shown in the face of unimaginable challenges. She had endured loneliness, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had never lost hope. Tom shared his own reflections, speaking of the lessons he had learned from life on the plains, the importance of patience, observation, and helping others in need. They laughed quietly at small moments of humor from their travels and spoke softly of dreams for the future. The bond they had formed was no longer fragile, it was strong, built on shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. The days that followed in the settlement were filled with care and rebuilding. Morning Star rested, regained her strength, and began to feel a sense of normalcy she had not experienced in weeks. The villagers welcomed her, offering support, guidance, and friendship. She learned to trust again, to laugh again, and to imagine a life beyond fear. Tom remained nearby, watching over her from a respectful distance, ensuring that her transition to safety was smooth. He had fulfilled his promise, guiding her through danger and uncertainty to a place where she could thrive. Before leaving the settlement, Tom and Morning Star shared a quiet moment alone. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude and emotion. "I would not have survived without you." Tom shook his head gently. "You survived because of your courage," he replied. "I just helped you see the path. Remember that strength, it will guide you always." They exchanged a look that conveyed more than words ever could, a shared understanding of the journey, the struggles they had faced, and the bond that had formed in the wilderness. As Tom rode away, returning to the open plains, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had not experienced in years. The journey had tested him as much as it had tested Morning Star. It had reminded him of the power of courage, trust, and compassion. He looked back once, seeing Morning Star standing at the edge of the settlement, safe, strong, and ready to face her future. A sense of quiet pride filled him, knowing that he had played a part in helping her reclaim her life. The story of the night in the old house, the journey through the wilderness, and the arrival at safety would remain with both of them forever. For Morning Star, it was a journey from fear to hope, from isolation to connection, and from survival to the beginning of a new life. For Tom, it was a reminder of the unexpected ways life could challenge him and reward him, and how a single act of courage and kindness could change someone's life forever. As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tom rode into the horizon, the wind in his hair and the promise of new adventures ahead. Morning Star watched from the safety of the settlement, her heart filled with gratitude, strength, and hope. The journey was over, but the lessons, the bond, and the courage they had shared would last a lifetime. In the vast, untamed wilderness, two lives had intersected in a moment of fate, and the echoes of that encounter would resonate far beyond the canyon, the forest, and the plains.